Hey everybody. Last week I did a video with Sans on the most important logs to collect in your cloud environment, and that was the activity logs or the CloudTrail logs. All that interaction with the management plane. So this week I decided I would do another group of logs and maybe give a little bit perspective on when to collect these and how much that maybe you've heard in other places. So real quick, let's talk about the storage logs. All right, so what information in our activity logs do we see about our storage devices? These are in Azure, they're called storage accounts. In AWS, they're called S3 buckets. Well, our activity logs will show actions against the storage account or the S3 bucket itself. So creating the bucket, deleting the bucket, making updates to the parameters about the construct of the bucket. In AWS, we'll also get when the person or the attacker will list the names of all the buckets. In Azure, we don't really get lists and gets very much, but we do see in the activity logs when somebody does a list keys, the storage account keys, and that usually indicates they're about to interact with the storage account. The problem is that's it. We don't get information about the actual data that's inside of the storage account. So what are we going to need to be able to do that? Well, we're going to need our storage count logs. So in S3 logs is what they're called in AWS, and in Azure they're called storage access logs. And these are the creates, deletes, and reads and writes actions about individual data stored in these storage accounts. We're going to be able to see that interaction with the blobs, including the reads, which is really, really good, especially if we're trying to find an attacker who might be stealing your data. If I didn't have storage logs and I saw an attacker had gained access to my environment, maybe they're in AWS and I see they've done a list buckets, or in Azure they did a list keys. I know they're poking around the storage counts, but without turning on the storage logs, I'm not going to know what data they stole. What did they see? Was there sensitive data in there that they got access to? Oh no, they actually might have gotten some accidentally stored key information or secrets or something like that. That's always a question. Without the logs, we're not going to know if they were able to get that information or not. Sometimes if you see a report about an attack and the victim will say, well, we had no evidence that data was stolen, that might just mean that they didn't have their logs turned on. So how are we going to turn these on? In AWS, we turn it on through CloudTrail. This is super easy. In AWS, if I have CloudTrail logs going to an S3 bucket so I can store forever, or maybe to your Splunk instance, however you set up your data flow, I can go and say, all right, also collect information about the storage logs. Go and grab those S3 access logs. Or those S3 data logs. And it will describe those gets, deletes, and updates and reads. That's the big deal. In Azure, it's a little bit different. I'm going to have to turn on diagnostic settings for every storage account. But the nice thing about Azure is Azure has this policy environment where I can set a policy at the top level, and it will say, hey, go turn on your diagnostic settings for your storage accounts. If you don't have them turned on, go and turn them on. I'll turn them on for you. And it'll go into that and through all of the accounts if you set it up like that. So one question I have, we always talk about is how much of this data should I grab? It's a ton of data. Lots of gets about stuff that it's the job of these storage accounts for people to go and pull them or read them and delete them. And so you're going to get a ton of data, so much more than your activity logs, usually, in a pretty healthy environment. So we always have this conversation in our class about, do we collect them or not? And probably about half the students say, yes, we'll collect them for everything. And the other half will say, we'll only collect them for production environments, which seems like a great idea because you can reduce the amount of data you're grabbing. And you got to think about how much data you're pulling in. You've got to upsize your SIM and manage all that flow. But so if you can limit your data, that's great. However, I find that in the storage accounts, it can get tricky. In a production environment, you may not actually know what your real production system is. Someone can have production data in a non-production account. It's now production, right? I mean, so you got to be careful about that. And so in AWS specifically, it's very easy in AWS organizations to just say, turn on CloudTrail everywhere and also turn on S3 bucket logs everywhere. And then maybe when you collect that and gather it into your SIEM, you can do some tricks to make it pull into a different index or something like that. And Azure, it's a little bit easier or a little bit safer to segment out if you already had management groups that are segmenting your production versus your non-production. But I'll be honest with you, if you have an event and you know that someone's gotten into your environment, you're pretty sure they were looking for your data. If you don't have your access logs or your storage account logs turned on, you're going to turn them on right away across the whole company. So that's going to happen if there's an event. So just be prepared and ready for it. All right. Well, my name is Shaun McCullough. I'm a cloud security engineer at GitHub. I'm also the co-author of Security 541, which is all about cloud threat detection. Thanks for listening. Hopefully I'll see you again sometime.